The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
The Illinois primary season is in full swing. Attack ads, allegations of voter fraud, and record amounts of campaign cash. Tonight, the big races and the big questions. Can an embattled Anita Alvarez hang on to her job as Cook County State's Attorney? Is an upset in the making for the most powerful man in Springfield? Will Donald Trump finally hit a roadblock in Illinois? Plus, a new look at those old-fashioned campaign buttons made right here in Chicago. Stay with us for these stories and much more tonight on this Illinois primary edition of In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Chris Bury. Early voting is already underway for Tuesday's primary election in Illinois, with important contests all the way up to party nominations for president. We'll have more on that soon, but first, no local race is more hotly contested than the battle for Cook County State's Attorney. Incumbent Anita Alvarez is in the fight of her political life.
I'm running for re-election for Cook County State's Attorney because it's been my passion for the last 29 years. It continues to be my passion, and there's so much more work that we continue to do, that we need to do, and I believe I'm the best person to do that.
In this campaign commercial, Alvarez points to her experience, but the battle for her job hinges on another video, this one. Alvarez has come under withering criticism for her handling of the Laquan McDonald shooting. The white police officer who shot the African-American teenager was not charged with murder for more than a year, and only when the video was about to be released. Chicago Sun-Times columnist Laura Washington believes the McDonald case is the driving force in this election.
I think it put the race on the map. I think that Anita Alvarez was headed for an easy re-election campaign without Laquan McDonald. It created such an uproar, people calling for her head, and that turned the race around and made it a real contest.
Alvarez is competing against two other lawyers, Kim Fox and Donna Moore. In their ad campaigns, both candidates are attacking the way Alvarez handled the McDonald case.
When State's Attorney Anita Alvarez did nothing about this murder, she proved our justice system is broken. Kim Fox is the only candidate who has what it takes to fix it.
As gun violence rages on our streets and misconduct plagues the state's attorney's office, Anita Alvarez must go. Two challengers, one clear choice. Only one has the experience to restore our trust, Donna Moore.
In the most recent televised debate, Alvarez defended her investigation of the Laquan McDonald shooting and bitterly attacked the campaign ads of her rivals.
For anyone to suggest that me, as a mother of 4 children, would look at a video of a young man being murdered and do nothing is just the absolute untruth. For anybody to do that, they want to score political points.
Kim Fox has also emphasized her personal story.
The daughter of a teenage single mother, a child of Cabrini Green.
Growing up poor in a housing project before working her way up to the prosecutor's office. Fox then served as chief of staff to Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. Now Fox's former boss and the Cook County Democratic Party are backing her bid to unseat Alvarez.
We got to change our criminal justice system. And we have an opportunity in this election to transform it by electing Kim Fox. Please welcome her.
I would simply say that I've been a lawyer for almost 20 years, and I spent 15 years practicing in courtrooms every single day, dealing with some of the most difficult crimes.
But Fox's campaign has also triggered criticism from those who say she lacks experience as a prosecutor and would be influenced by powerful political backers such as Preckwinkle.
I'm working for the people of Cook County. I'm working for those communities who have lost faith in a criminal justice system that has failed them.
The other candidate, Donna Moore, is a former federal prosecutor and private attorney. With far less campaign money than Alvarez and Fox, Moore has been working L-stops to raise her profile.
Hi, good morning. I'm running for Cook County State's Attorney.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Moore has never run for a major elected office before, but the Chicago lawyer says she is working hard to convince voters that she is the only candidate free from strong political ties.
I am independent, and it is hard to fight the machine, but I believe that voters are sick and tired of having candidates forced down their throat that aren't qualified to do the job. I'm ready to do the job of being Cook County State's Attorney, and I'm ready to be accountable to the people of Cook County.
In this three-way primary election, voter turnout is critical.
I think if you have a high turnout, that is favorable to Anita Alvarez's opponents, because that means there's a lot of interest in this race, there's a lot of passion, and that might work against her. I think her opponents are all, her opponent particularly, Kim Foxx, would be looking for a high turnout among African-American voters.
In the latest Tribune poll, Alvarez leads with 34%, Kim Foxx at 27%, Donna Moore getting 12%, and a whopping 26% undecided. And joining us tonight are Steve Edwards, Executive Director for the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, Paula Thornton Greer, Vice President of External Affairs for the Chicago Urban League, and Nick Katcher-Rubis, Associate Teaching Professor for the School of Public Service at DePaul University, and welcome everyone. So we have this whopping huge 26% undecided in the Cook County's race. Steve, does that suggest this race is up for grabs?
Absolutely, and I think what you're looking at right now is a dynamic in a lot of races, actually, where the undecideds are still quite high. Even in the presidential race in Illinois, on the Republican side, there are nearly 20% of voters in a campaign that's been going on for months that are undecided. So it's an opportunity, certainly, for all of the candidates in the state's attorney's race to continue to hammer home their messages. Anita Alvarez has a lot of funding, as does Kim Foxx, so that's helping them in these final days as they try to define both who they are in this race and also identify the voters that they need to get to the polls.
And so, Paula, we heard that turnout might be very critical in this race. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely agree, and it's something that I'm concerned about. I think there's a level of enthusiasm that goes along with the races here in Illinois and also nationally. I would like to see a high voter turnout. I'd like to make sure that the enthusiasm from our young voters translates into showing up at the polls, and that people of color show up in mass as well. Absent that, I'm afraid that we are not going to see a sea change, let alone a change of anything.
And in terms of the African-American voters, you think that's going to help Kim Foxx in this election?
You know, I think it depends. My hope is that all voters, not just African-American voters, are looking at the issues that matter to individuals, to communities, to the city and the state as a whole. So I think that there is a certain affinity for candidates because they have been talking about the issues, but this certainly will not be determined on the basis of black or white.
Nick, we saw in the setup report there that Anita Alvarez is lashing back at her opponents for, in her words, exploiting the Laquan McDonald video. Is that a fair point, or is that politics as usual?
I think it's politics as usual, and I think we can expect that in this. This is the first election we've had since those videos became public, and so this is the first opportunity that the public has had, and very vehemently she's been called to resign, so is Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So here's the first electoral opportunity voters have to make their voice known, but it is a heated race, and we're going to see where that turns out.
The use of that video, what do you think?
I think the use of that video is, you can't avoid that video.
So it's appropriate.
Right. I think, let's be clear. I mean, absent that video, this would be an entirely different race in my estimation. There are so many things that are attached to that video. It is not simply about the incident or the response. It is this interconnectivity of issues that surround why the incident in that video happened in the first place.
One of the go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, there's no question that this is the defining issue in this race, and it's not just Laquan McDonald. It's 8 years that Anita Alvarez has had in office, and a number of other cases that have actually brought scrutiny, including the David Kochman case, the Rakia Boyd case. So that's what's firing up a large portion of the Kim Foxx supporters in an effort to really drive change and to lead to a turnover in that office.
The third candidate here is Donna Moore, and her main selling point seems to be that she would be independent after raising concerns about perhaps Kim Foxx being beholden to Tony Kreckwinkle. Is this a position that should be independent of this kind of politics, or are we asking too much in Chicago?
Well, I think personally, I would say that it should be independent. You would want, I think, your state's attorney to kind of be this independent race, but unfortunately, the way our system is set up and historically, the Cook County state's attorney has been a very political office. So as much as I believe that Donna Moore has a great position and a great message, I'm not sure if that really, at the end of the day, will play into the actual votes that turn out.
But you know, Nick, really quickly, I think what voters are more concerned about this cycle is not so much the independence from partisan politics, but how independent the prosecutors in that office are from other elements of law enforcement, from police, from the judicial system. Are they actually working on behalf of voters' interests and citizens' interests in a way that's fair and above board and freed from the kinds of influences that those tight relationships often suggest?
Absolutely. I mean, we've heard a lot over the course of the past couple of months, particularly since the Laquan McDonald video, about this word accountability, right? So I think that people are looking for candidates who can speak to accountability, define it, and say how they are going to act in accordance with shared accountability. You know, and that just goes back to the issues at hand. I think if candidates could talk about the systemic issues that exist in the city, that exist on a national level, they could dig down, we could begin to dig down to the root of these issues. And I think that's what leaves some people sort of ambiguous right now about whether or not they are going to vote, and if so, for whom.
Well, but I also think that there's a deeper issue, too, in this whole electoral cycle about accountability and the idea of placing blame and voter anger. And I think there is a faction of saying, you know, Anita Alvarez should be held accountable for these things, and maybe there's another opportunity. So I agree that there's deep-seated issues and an opportunity to look at the systematic change, but there's also the voter anger piece that has to be taken.
We have to hold off on the state's attorney race for just a moment. We have another important race. House Speaker Michael Madigan, perhaps the most powerful politician in Illinois, has been serving his Southwest Side district for 45 years. He's normally a shoo-in for re-election, but on Tuesday, Madigan faces 3 primary challengers, and one of them may have a long shot, although it's a very, very long shot, at unseating him.
I'm Jason Gonzalez. I'm running for state representative.
Jason Gonzalez works his way through a lunchtime crowd at a popular restaurant on the Southwest Side.
Look, I'm about raising wages. You know, my opponent, he blocked the minimum wage increase.
Gonzalez has degrees from Duke University, Harvard, and MIT. Despite that prestigious academic pedigree, he stresses his blue-collar roots. His dad was a union electrician.
You know, I know what's going on. I know the kind of problems that our families are facing, and, you know, I'm prepared to go to Springfield to fight for us.
The Gonzalez campaign works out of a modest storefront office on South Pulaski. The Democratic challenger and his small campaign staff are constantly working the phones.
I'm hoping I can count on your support.
You know, Speaker Madigan has been in office for 45 years now, and our state is a mess. You know, we're in deep trouble.
Gonzalez has his work cut out for him if he intends to defeat Madigan. The Speaker enjoys wide support among his constituents in the 22nd District. Madigan campaign signs blanket residential neighborhoods. But Gonzalez points out that the demographics in the district have changed. Roughly 70% of the population is now Latino. His campaign slogan, "It's time for a change."
I would be shocked beyond belief if he comes close, let alone wins that district.
Roosevelt University professor Paul Green has written extensively about Chicago politics. He says there are several reasons for Madigan's long-term success.
He does his homework. He is very, very detail-oriented and has put together an organization based on patronage, based on longevity, based on relationships, and he delivers the vote.
For more than 4 decades, Madigan, the longest-serving House Speaker in Illinois history, has represented the 22nd District, which surrounds Midway Airport. From this small, mostly working-class neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago, Madigan, who also heads the Illinois Democratic Party, controls nearly the entire state. Green says Madigan is perhaps the most powerful politician in Illinois history.
He is the only person still in government who was at the Constitutional Convention of 1970. And so not only does he know the Constitution, he helped write it.
Madigan did not respond to In the Loop's request for an interview, but during a rare appearance on Univision TV, the speaker claimed his opponent Gonzalez is being bankrolled by Governor Rauner.
Oh, I have a primary in a few weeks, and I have Hispanic opponents in the primary election, one of whom is supported, in my judgment, by Governor Rauner.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's coming straight from Speaker Madigan's mouth. You know, I've never met Governor Rauner. I haven't been put up by him.
That's kind of a fascinating race. And Steve, is the Speaker in any political jeopardy?
It's hard to see that he would be somebody who could lose a race like this, given everything that Paul Green described in that setup piece. Certainly the organization is very, very well-grounded, very, very well-funded, and Madigan is as tough a political opponent as any. However, the very fact that Michael Madigan is going on Univision and talking about this race, the fact they're clearly taking it very seriously, it suggests that Gonzalez is the kind of candidate who could make noise. So I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly possible.
And of course, the reason that Madigan went on Univision is because he's trying to reach a Hispanic audience, and that district on the southwest side, Laura, has really changed. When he started, it was sort of ethnic Eastern European, and now it's majority Latino. Is that making a big difference on the politics?
I think that it does. I think that it's critically important. I mean, clearly, communities of color have been ignored for far too long, and I think it's rather late in the game to get started for this elective cycle, and hopefully we'll continue past that. But I just want to speak to the fact that this is a particularly interesting race for me. We heard the Constitution referenced in that package. If we look at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I would argue that that has just been torn down. Life, so many young people of color losing their life at the hands of each other or at the hands of police, right? Liberty, right? The freedom to excel, to prosper. Where are the jobs? These college students at Chicago State University, whose very future is threatened, and therefore the pursuit of happiness. What path do we take to get there? So I'm very interested in this particular race.
Now, this race, as we heard in the opening piece, is also being set up as kind of a proxy, right, between Madigan and Rauner. What about that? You heard the charge from Mike Madigan that, in fact, he thinks his opponent is being set up by Governor Rauner.
Well, I think that it's definitely a possibility, not necessarily that Rauner is bankrolling that candidate, although I've heard that as well. But I think it's a close reminder to Madigan that, you know, every representative, even the speaker, has to get elected. And I think that's an important message to remind all politicians, specifically ones that have been in leadership for a long time. Do I think the speaker has a shot at losing? No, I think he's got the organization and the clout to pull in the victory. But it certainly will stick as a bug in his crawl for the next 2 years as he serves in his tenure against policies that the governor will have. So I don't see this being any sort of healing in the relationship between the governor and the speaker.
We have another fascinating sort of proxy war race, and that's in the 5th Illinois Legislative District, where the incumbent Ken Duncan, of course, is running against Giuliana Stratton. That's been a fascinating race to watch, and President Obama has even inserted himself into this race with a television commercial. Let's hear what Mr. Obama has to say about the 5th District.
30 years ago, I came to Chicago to help strengthen our community. One of the biggest lessons I learned is that follow-through is everything. The people of Chicago deserve leaders who follow through. Giuliana Stratton has spent her career serving our community.
So, Steve, why is the President of the United States getting involved in this local race for a state representative?
I love the Tribune editorial board's line that says, "We look forward to the President's endorsements of candidates for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District." It's uncanny. We have not seen an endorsement like this from this president or really many other presidents in a long time. And it has to do with a couple of things. This race in particular is pivotal. The stakes are enormously high. You talked a little bit about the proxy for Madigan and Rauner in the Madigan race. It's absolutely the case in this one. What's at stake is the supermajority that Madigan currently holds in the Illinois House. And why does that matter? Because the entire competing agendas around budgets and Rauner's turnaround agenda and funding for schools and higher education and child services is at stake. So that's a key issue. The other issue is Ken Duncan himself used Obama's remarks on the floor of the General Assembly just a couple of weeks ago in an ad suggesting that Obama was supporting and endorsing Duncan. And I think those two things combined really drew the president out on this one to hand slap Duncan and really correct the record.
And of course, on the other side, allies of Governor Rauner have put a lot of money on Mr. Duncan in this race.
Yeah, I mean, Duncan has been one of those holdout votes, so the supermajority hasn't been able to override vetoes of the governor. And so this is obviously a targeted race for the speaker. Obviously, the governor wants to keep Duncan there to be able to have that vote. So I agree, to get to that veto-proof majority, this is a critical seat.
Yeah, and with respect to the endorsement, I'm actually wondering how much weight that does carry, because I have seen studies that show that endorsements are critical and that they do help to move the needle. But I'm unsure as to whether it's going to help or hurt in this current environment.
You know, there's another big primary contest, and that is the U.S. Senate. Republican Mark Kirk is way ahead in the polling. He's clearly going to be the nominee. Among Democrats, Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth dominating her two rivals, Andrea Zopp and Napoleon Harris. Any surprises that this has become so lopsided?
I would start off saying that, you know, I'm surprised in the sense that again, Tammy Duckworth was the favorite on the Democratic side for a long time, but I hadn't seen much out of her. I hadn't heard much out of her. I've seen a lot of things going on with Zopp, at least here in Chicago, and so I was surprised. I was actually in D.C. last week and was in a conversation where the polling numbers just had her Tammy Duckworth so far ahead that they're just not even paying attention to it. So I guess she walks into it. The real critical question is, what does it look like in the general, which I think really does support Tammy
Doesn't that
Duckworth.
set up an interesting race in the fall between Kirk and Duckworth?
It does, and isn't it sad that we have to say something like, well, she just walks into it? I mean, that's not how this process should be going. And it's interesting to me, as I look at the various communities that make up Chicago, I see very little signage or awareness or engagement with coming in to talk to the community members. So to me, and I believe to other people that are poised to vote, that sends a very clear signal of not only are you not here, but you are dismissing us.
Let's move to the top of the card just for a little bit. Beyond the local races, all eyes are on the Illinois presidential primary. On the Democratic side, the latest Tribune poll gives Hillary Clinton a clear edge over Bernie Sanders. For Republicans, Donald Trump leads a divided field at 32%, 10 points behind Texas Senator Ted Cruz and Florida Senator Marco Rubio. They're basically tied. And Ohio Governor John Kasich trails 18%, only 7% undecided. Steve, Bernie Sanders gave Hillary Clinton quite a scare in Michigan. Is she safe here on her home turf?
I think if you ask the Clinton folks, they would say they're not so sure. The polls certainly show her with a substantial lead right now. Most of the polls show about a 14-point advantage there. But we saw an even bigger lead in Michigan, and I think Bernie Sanders certainly derived a lot of momentum coming out of Michigan. The question, I think, in a lot of these races, and particularly on the Democratic side with this presidential race, but it's also to your point earlier, Paula, and really to the Gonzalez-Madigan race, is how much can Bernie Sanders engage and broaden this electorate? If, in fact, he can increase the electorate, it's also true in the Senate race, then I think he will have an opportunity to surprise on Tuesday. I think right now the momentum is in his favor, but the structural advantages still really augur toward a Clinton victory.
I agree, and I do think that Sanders got started a little bit too late. I mean,
Here in Illinois.
Here in Illinois, and I think across the country, quite frankly. It was approximately 2 years ago that I first remember him stating that he might decide to run for president. And there seems to be just a long gap. People are just beginning to know him, to learn about him, and sort of this movement that you're seeing among first-time voters, among younger voters, isn't necessarily translating. But I think we may see a surprise.
And on the Republican side, Donald Trump, Nick, appears to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, certainly does.
Is anybody going to be able to stop him here in Illinois?
You know, I think there might have been a possibility if you asked me after March 1st, but I think more and more it's becoming clear that voters are supporting Donald Trump on the Republican side, and they're split among the other candidates. And you know, so somebody might get some other pieces of delegates, but I think Donald Trump is the clear front runner. I would just say that after Michigan, though, on the Democratic side, I think it does give Illinois another look, particularly between Sanders and Clinton. Had Clinton won in Michigan overwhelmingly, I think Illinois would not have been a key state.
I would say that that's a very, very good thing for voters. This is really the first time in a long time that both parties in the presidential race have had contested primaries where Illinois could be consequential in some way.
Illinois hasn't mattered in a long time.
Right.
But Illinois, on the Republican side, is also supposed to be a moderate Republican side. Why aren't the moderates like Kasich? Why aren't they doing better here?
But I think that the whole system has just been sort of, for lack of a better phrase, muckety-mucked. I think, sort of the general consensus of what a Republican is has changed. I mean, and that's due in large part to Trump at the head of the table right now. So for me, I'm going to look to see what these two parties look like after the election. So I think that leaves people on a line where they're swaying a little bit. They actually don't know which way to go regardless of which party they're in.
Well, and that's especially true inside the Republican establishment. In fact, the Cook County Republican Party got together this week, tried to amass enough support to actually formally endorse Kasich. They came just short of that. There's
no
a divide,
endorsement, but a recommendation.
A recommendation. There's a divide between the Kasich and Rubio camps. My sense is in the latest polling and what's happening nationally that Kasich may have more momentum going into Tuesday than Rubio, who's really suffering because of the disappointments last week. But I think you have this, as Nick said, this inability to sort of coalesce around one alternative that actually is creating a really open lane continually for Trump.
Just a few seconds left, 5 seconds from each of you. Who wins on each side in the Illinois primary at the presidential level? Just seconds.
I would say Trump and Clinton on Tuesday.
I honestly don't know, but I will say that I hope that the people win, and the only way that the people are going to win is if everybody goes out to vote.
Nick?
I say Trump and Clinton.
Very well. Thank you so much to our panelists. We appreciate it. Steve Edwards, Paula Thornton-Greer, and Nick Katsarubis. For all the campaigning on television and social media this election year, one old-school method of political communication is alive and well, and the business behind it is right here in Chicago. On Chicago's northwest side hangs one of the biggest buttons of its kind in the world. Its message, a giant hello from the Busy Beaver Button Company. Inside, company employees are bustling, producing up to 100,000 buttons a week. During campaign seasons like this, the company says, button sales typically spike by about 10%. Kristen Carter, the company's president, says TV ads may be dominating the airwaves, but old-fashioned political buttons are still popular for candidates and causes.
I mean, especially on a presidential year, election year, we'll see, because there's a lot more issues and there's just more button wearing happening during the election years, because there's people particularly caring and paying more attention to what and talking about things more openly.
Carter started the business in 1995 when she was in college, selling buttons out of her apartment. Since then, the business has boomed. And today, she employs a staff of 24. They are making much more than just your run-of-the-mill campaign buttons.
Hello, Busy Beaver Button Company. This is Ben. How may I help you?
All of them could be magnets. We can also make some of them into bottle openers, mirrors, and we also do glow-in-the-dark, holographic, neon, and as well as just standard 4-color print buttons.
In addition to making buttons, the company also has a museum collection featuring historical examples through the years. Glass displays show off various causes, campaigns, and buttons that illustrate historical figures all the way back to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and John F. Kennedy. The company's entire collection includes about 15,000 buttons. More than 4,000 of them are now displayed in the museum and online. Between museum visitors and campaign season, business is especially busy during this time of year.
Campaign season is always interesting. We see a lot more political buttons, a lot more cause buttons, and it's cool because we see people come in and order their buttons, or their campaign people coming in and talking about what's going on or who's going to be on the news. It's cool to be a hub where you see a lot of different perspectives.
And don't forget to vote on Tuesday. That wraps up tonight's show. You are now in the loop. To learn more about our show, guests, and stories, log on to WYCC.org and click on In the Loop. And next week, has Illinois become the land of shrinking corporate giants? What's the outlook for our local economy in 2016? Join my colleague Lauren Cohn on In the Loop next week. Until then, I'm Chris Bury. Good night.